Greetings, everyone. Today, me, Yash, and Sneh are graced with the presence of Ms. Shrinal Sheth, an alumni of Christ University from the class of 2016. At Christ, she specialized in finance and investment and is now an investment banker in London. While that may seem like a straightforward career path, there are many interesting elements in the journey, from studying international affairs to working at the World Economic Forum where she was the youngest project lead ever. That will delve into today's conversation. Mom, we wholeheartedly welcome you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Ma'am, ma'am, as Yash already told you, like we really welcome you through our interview session and we're really thankful for your time. So, ma'am, can you share with us your journey from Christ University to working at Deutsche Bank?
Of course, when I was at Christ University, when I was in your shoes, I myself did not expect that this was going to be my journey. Investment banking, I wouldn't say was on my radar at that point. Of course, I was studying finance and investment because I come from a family business background. So we have a manufacturing and trading business in the chemical sector in India. And that's where I thought I was going to end up, at least briefly, which is also what I did after Christ University. So I spent a year there. And then I was always interested. Funnily enough, I took a class called Strategic Studies at Christ. And that was, I believe, at that point, Department of Political Science. And I was very intrigued by what was taught in that class. It was mostly around, security studies and how all of that impacts businesses. So at that point, I thought maybe this is an area I want to explore. And then I decided to go to HEC in Paris, which is one of Europe's top business school, because they had a short-term program on business and geopolitics, because I did not want to commit to a 2-year master's degree program in international affairs without actually understanding if this is truly my interest area or is it just, like a passing fad. So I went to HEC, did the short-term course, and realized that, okay, this is probably something I am actually interested in. Came back to India, spent about a year in India, and then started applying for masters. A lot of people around me were also applying for masters. It was kind of nice to have that Christ University cohort, everybody doing the same things, looking for recommendations and this and that. And after that, basically, I went and pursued my master's at the Fletcher School at Tufts University in the US, where I studied both finance and international law. Eventually ended up working with the World Economic Forum, which was also, I wouldn't say by design. I actually didn't know what the forum did completely when I joined as an intern. So it was also a lot of revelation for me in terms of how powerful that organization can be and what it can bring to my career. But in my 3 years at the forum, while working on sustainability and private equity and a lot of different investing themes, I realized that I was in fact missing a skill set which came with an investment banking job. So financial modeling, working on deals, executing deals, and then eventually figuring out what that valuation journey looks like for a company. And that's when I decided to move into this investment banking space. So I joined Deutsche Bank in September of 2022. So it's been 5 months, and so far it's been very interesting.
Mom, that was a great journey as described by you. So, Mom, as both of us are students from Christ University, what I wanted to know that why did you choose Christ University and how did it help you grow in terms of responsibilities, academics, and co-curriculars?
Great. So, good question. I think I applied to 3 universities. So I was looking at Christ University, of course. I was looking at Narsee Monjee in Mumbai, and I was looking at Flame in Pune, which is more of a liberal arts school. When I was maybe in my +2, I was thinking through what universities I would want to look at, and Delhi University was immediately kind of out of question because it required you to take math, and I'm not a huge fan of studying math. So I tried to avoid that. And then essentially DU was out. So then I looked at the top universities and was left with basically Christ and Narsee Monjee, which offered BCom honors programs. But to be honest, as soon as I visited the Christ University campus for my interview, I knew that this is where I want to go because the infrastructure was solid. and the course structure was also quite solid, and I wanted to be far enough from my hometown, which is Ahmedabad, to actually learn about new cultures, meet new people, and also have exposure to different languages and such, because at the end of the day, Mumbai is significantly closer to Gujarat, so the culture somewhat can be similar, and I just wanted to experience something different. So that's kind of how I ended up choosing Christ. And then in terms of academics and extracurriculars, to be honest, I did a variety of different things that I didn't think I would do before I joined Christ. So that's when I also picked up photography. So I participated in a lot of competitions at Christ, outside Christ, won a bunch of them as well, which was quite a confidence boost, because when you pick up a new skill, if you immediately see that you're doing well in that, then you stick to it. Because if you don't see the results, a lot of the times you kind of leave it and move on. Did a lot of quizzing, tried my hand at debating as well, but that was not something I was as interested in, so kind of dropped out on that. Participated in a lot of like business plan competitions as well, which was super interesting. And I had a very strong circle of friends during my time at Christ, and all of us were interested in similar things. So that helped us participate in these business plan kind of competitions and actually do well in those.
As you told, like you participated in photography and all, like if I may ask, what was your initial career plan?
Sure. So my initial career plan, well, I would say my career plan has changed pretty much every 2 years, because when I was at Christ, I was really intrigued by the topic of political risk insurance. But then as I went deeper into that subject, I realized this is actually a very, very niche field to build a career out of. And while it sounds interesting and it is an interesting field, I don't think I would have enjoyed that type of a job in the insurance space, which is what I picked up, I would say, probably in my third year at Christ. I actually wrote an article on political risk insurance for one of the magazines for Christ as well, because I was so interested in the topic. And the World Bank's Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency does quite a bit of that for very large infrastructure projects, helps corporates as well when they're setting up factories or manufacturing units in countries that have political instability, etc. But yeah, like I said, I realized that that's probably not a space I want to be in. So went back to my family business to pick up on some real world business skills as well. Interned in between as well in the marketing space, because I was doing finance, but I did want to see if marketing was an area of interest for me. So that's when I pursued my internship with Hanger, which was really strongly focused on digital marketing, which is a big theme now, but back in 2014, very few people were actually talking about it, teaching about it, or having internships in that regard. So it was actually quite good for me to learn about, search engine optimization, SEMs, how do you use Google Analytics and other types of things, which I have used in my other jobs as well. So I would say it was a mix of realizing what I don't want to do that led me to figuring out what I actually might be interested in doing.
Actually, as you mentioned, like in 2014, it was like AI wasn't up. Like now it's in every little conversation. But back then, it's actually amazing to hear that. So, Mom, we wanted to know initially that you said you joined Christ University. But while looking at your resume or like LinkedIn, we realized that you went to the Fletcher School at Tufts University. So how was the experience there, and like how did you like get in there? Like if you could like elaborate on the process of getting in there, because most of the students, even right now, are trying to pursue their post-graduation in abroad. So how did you manage every single thing?
Of course. So the Fletcher School is basically an international affairs school. It's one of the top 5 programs in the US. And there are lots of other programs too, which are equally good, from Johns Hopkins, from New York University, etc. For me, what was interesting about the Fletcher School was I could continue to pursue a focus on international finance while expanding my focus in international affairs. So if you look at the title of my degree, it's still Master of International Business. So the first entire year I spent studying the core business curriculum. So it's kind of like a hybrid MBA, if you will. And then second year is when I actually expanded into, business law, security studies, how petroleum affects the global economy, and what does that mean for businesses? Because when we talk about, the oil crisis or anything, we're looking at it from a very small, narrow lens. But when you actually take these types of classes from professors who've just done this for their entire life, they see how it impacts every single piece of the global economy. So that was also very interesting for me to see. And another interesting thing about the program at Fletcher is that you can take one semester's worth of classes at any school at Harvard. So I ended up studying at Harvard Kennedy School and Harvard Law School as well. So all of these things kind of help you expand your network, right? When you're going abroad, spending so much time, energy, money, effort, you want to make sure that you maximize the return you can get out of it. And part of the return is the network you build. So the more, let's say, institutions you have access to, the better it is to build a very, varied network of things. Because sometimes I rely on my classmates from Fletcher, but certain times I also reach back out to my classmates from Harvard. So it's a good way to have connections with a lot of different types of people who are doing extremely different things. So those were kind of a couple of reasons why I picked Fletcher. And then going into the application process. So I knew that I would like to pursue a master's degree program at some point. So one of the things I did, which actually worked out in my favor when I was actually applying for the programs, is I took recommendations from our professors at Christ before I actually left Christ University. Because certain times what happens is, you come back 2 years later and it's very possible the professor may not remember everything you did, everything about you in the class, because they go through so many students, right? It's thousands and thousands of students every year. So it's a bit difficult for them to recollect. So my idea was, let me get one now, because then they will sign it. They've thought about what I've done, why I could be a good fit for a program. And then if I come back in a couple of years, they can read that thing that they already wrote once. So it's not like, a complete shocker when I go to them and be like, hi, I need your recommendation. They already have a starting point and they can perhaps more easily recollect what I did. So that actually worked out in my favor, because when I went back about a year and a half later, most professors were very happy to do it almost immediately. So I could apply in what they call the early bird deadline, which, to be honest, in my opinion, is something most students should try to do, especially international students, because the earlier you start, the better chances you have of getting in as you move through rounds. Rounds 2 and 3 get more and more difficult, especially as international students, because you also have to think through the visa processes and things like that. And maybe another thing to share is just around writing essays. That's typically a very important part of most applications. Certain schools have interviews, certain don't. In my case, I had interviews from a couple of schools, and the questions can be really varied, right? I think one of the questions, what was your favorite toy as a child, and how has that shaped you as a person? So it can be extremely varied. And when you're writing your essays, you have to make sure that you leave enough, let's say, hook points for them to pick up on during that interview, because you want to somewhat direct your interview as well. You don't want that you go into the interview and they just ask anything under the sun, which is still possible. But at least if they've read your essay and they want to know something specific from your essay, then you have a better shot at actually getting into the program.
It was really nice to hear, ma'am. Ma'am, if I may ask, is there any experience from Christ that still tags along with you, which is in your heart?
There are a few, but I think the one I would point out is we did a business plan competition. So it was me and two of my closest friends, who are still my closest friends to this day. And we came up with a concept called Petpuri, which was basically a luxury pet not just food products or anything, but everything to do with a pet care first, so like a life cycle perspective. And this is back in 2014, I think, when India did not have like Heads Up for Tails and other such brands that have emerged in the past five, 5 years or so, maybe even less. So we came up with this plan, thought through, what are the different types of products a company like Petbury can provide, from like, interesting looking housing options to like food and clothes and whatnot. And after the internal Christ competition, which we won, we were actually approached by someone to fund our idea and provide seed funding for it. I guess at that point, none of us was ready to go down that path, and we declined the funding offer. But now sometimes when I do think back, I'm like, okay, maybe I should have done that, just given how the pet market has exploded. And I carry that experience along also as a reminder now that if there is an opportunity that you spot in the market, then it might be worth at least giving it a shot as a side project, if nothing else, to see where it goes. So now I think I carry that learning and try to spot whatever I can in the market and see what I can do about it.
Mom, I got inspired by the point where you said that you should always like focus on side business that you have, or because like I can really see the pet market really exploding right now. So if someone had that idea in 2014, that would have been a good thing right now.
Yeah.
Mom, what I want to know is that you mentioned earlier that your first internship was at Hanger in the business leadership and marketing program, which is an AI-based men's bespoke clothing brand. So you mentioned that AI wasn't that well known back then, but now it is. So back then, did you even think or know that AI was going to be a big thing now?
So when I joined the program, they were still working on that AI aspect. At that point, it wasn't as well developed as it is now. And it was one of the first brands, I think, in India that brought that concept in. Um, so when I started the internship, I barely had any idea about marketing. So AI was too far a topic for me to actually understand before I joined. But I think 2 or 2.5 months that I spent there, that's when I picked up on how powerful AI can actually be. And this was a slightly, let's say, simpler use case in that you're helping design bespoke men's clothing without that additional cost of, going to the perfect tailor and making sure everything's correct and like restitching, etc., etc. But now, I mean, AI with ChatGPT and the other things in the market you see right now, it has grown so much. So back then, did I see something like ChatGPT coming up? Probably not. But the only thing I could pick up on at that point is, okay, this may be a theme that becomes big. And I also worked with a lot of engineers during that particular internship because I think about 3 people in my team were from that science engineering background. So just being around them and seeing how they look at that from an engineering standpoint was interesting because I still came with my finance focus. So I did not have as much of a deeper, let's say, understanding on how that technology actually works. So being around them, and I'm still in touch with a lot of them, and they're all abroad as well, doing very different things. And I think that also helped because now they're doing way more in AI. So I can always go back to them and be like, okay, here's a question I have about this based on maybe, let's say, a deal I'm working on here at Deutsche Bank. And then they will be happy to answer for me because we've just had that long-term relationship and learned about AI together.
Ma'am, as you told, like you learned about AI and the automation that happened. I just wanted to ask, like, as you have heard, because of the recession and everything, Google, the Alphabet owned Google, Amazon, they're laying off their employees right and left. So, do you have any opinion on it? And do you think that investment sector, as it getting automation, like all the trades are now done by computers? Do you think it's a secure sector, or is it also going to face layoffs in the later future?
So that's a good question. Maybe a couple of things here. In terms of layoffs in the tech sector, what you see in the news, I think, is a part of the reason. But then when you think about it from a more granular business perspective, then you have to connect recession, which essentially means, if you brought it down to the dumbest level, slowing growth, right? That's what it is at the end of the day. So when you have slower growth, it means not just tech companies, a lot of different companies see a decline in their revenue. But for tech companies, if you think about what's the key metric that they have to maximize for to make sure that they're relevant for the future, it's revenue per employee, right? So when there's a slowing growth, you're looking at falling revenues, and you're also looking at a sector where revenue per employee is the biggest metric, which might be declining. So if it was, let's say, revenue per employee for Alphabet, and this is a random number, was $100,000. Now it's maybe $80,000, right? And as soon as the company sees that, and if they don't take any action, you also have a lot of activist investors that come in, right? So if you look at the case of Salesforce, for instance, there's a hedge fund called Elliott Management, which came into the business, built up a huge holding, and basically told them, you need to maximize your profits because you're a great company, but we're not seeing that in your bottom line. And to do that, they have to take certain actions, because otherwise you're left with investors that are trying to dictate what you should do with your company, which could go either way. Sometimes it's very good for companies, sometimes it's not. So as the CEO of a company like this, you have to make that decision. What is the direction you want to go? So at the end of the day, as long as they can maximize revenue per employee, and if their stock price is going in the right direction, they're fine. You haven't seen any layoff news from Apple yet, right? Why is that? Because their stock price hasn't taken as much of a dip as the rest of the companies. It's still down, of course, because the market's down, but it's almost as down as the market, maybe slightly, here and there. I haven't followed this week, but so it's not always just one thing. A lot of the times the analysis has to come from a business level. So that's also what I would suggest students who are at Christ and otherwise to do as well. Because when you talk about the automation piece in the investment sector, for example, right? Will there be layoffs based on just that? Probably not. Yes, of course, you need high computing power, and some people I know are in that space where they are the ones developing these programs that are so fast and so powerful that they can execute trades in a way that no human being probably could, right? But you need people who are developing those programs. So sure, maybe there will be cuts in terms of the exact trading profile, but then you have to start looking at what other skill you can develop alongside your financial skill set that you might be developing at Christ. So it could be something like coding. So for example, my final year thesis was a project that was more econometrics than it was finance. And the reason for that was that I saw at that point that this is a subject that is probably going to get more and more important. So I could either decide to learn it now when I have the time, or I could just wing it, and 5 years from now, when I really need to know, I would know nothing about it, right? So you're in your second year right now. A lot of people who are watching this may be in their final year, but if there's some skill set that you see in the market that you should pick up on, then the time to do it is now. Maybe you want to try coding, right? And if you want to become a financial trader, that's a very important skill set to have. So you cannot ignore that part, because whenever you think about automation, it's more about a transfer of jobs, right? So you have to think about what can you build so that you're on the better side of the transfer.
Okay, mom, you really gave us a lot of knowledge over here because you talked about tech companies with reference to recession, and you told us about revenue per employee and how it is being referenced to metrics and how investors have a lot of negative or positive impact and how CEOs are supposed to decide on things like that, and how Apple is still not laying off people because the stock market is in the right direction. And you also told us as college students about the direction which we should go on. But if you could summarize everything, and if you were given an option to tell all the students who are concerned about their future right now, in one statement, what would you tell them? And like, could you elaborate on that?
In one statement, that's a tough one. I think I would probably share a belief that I have kept throughout my time at Christ and afterwards as well. Now, almost, 10 years since I started at Christ, so a long time, which is any career is at the end of the day a very long term marathon. So, whatever first job you're going to pick may not really define your career as much, or maybe it does. You don't know that when you take up that job. So, you have to start focusing on what are the exact skills I want to get out of that job. When I started at the World Economic Forum, one of the key things I wanted to learn was how to interact with senior leadership without dragging on and making sure that my points come across to them in a very succinct way. The other thing I wanted to learn was more about sustainability issues because that's an area I truly cared about. But you have to figure out what are these things, because only then you can go to your manager and tell him or her that here are the 5 things I would like to get out of this experience while I am with you and this organization. And then you have to start working on those and start picking projects based on that. Of course, it's not easy in the first year of your career, so you have to be patient. You have to first prove that you are a credible employee, your manager can rely on you, and then you can start talking to them about, here's where I see my career going, and this is what you could help me learn. So I would say, if in one sentence I have to summarize, it would be focus on skill building and having a great relationship with your manager. Because for me, my managers have played a very large role in getting me to where I am today. I don't think without having great communication lines with them, I would be where I am, or I could ever become the youngest project lead at the World Economic Forum.
Mom, you gave us so much information, so much knowledge. We thank you so much for this. And we thank you so much for taking this time out of your schedule for us and for our interview.
And ma'am, then I just want to say, like, literally for me, you are my idol. Like, I really want to
Yes,
get into
ma'am.
investment banking. And it was really great talking to you. And thank you for your time. I know it's very busy for you, but still, it's a lot
No,
for us.
thank you so much for having me, and good luck with everything you do. I'm always available if you want more details on specifically, investment banking processes and how that recruitment cycle works as well. So have a good rest of your weekend.
Thank
Thank
you,
you so
ma'am.
much, mom. I wish the same for you. I hope
Thank you.
I hope you can keep on inspiring more people like us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.